Jobless at 21 years old, Kaiji has the excuse of living through tough economic times, but squanders that goodwill by spending his days in the least productive way possible, drinking in casinos all day before crying himself to sleep. He can't even fall back on being a nice guy because, frankly, he isn't. Outside of gambling, his one hobby is vandalizing imported cars. And while he does have intense moments of compassion, it's almost a byproduct of how emotionally frail he is. And most of the time, he's a rude, lazy, self-serving character who acts tough when he has an advantage but collapses the moment it's taken away. I could spend all day listing Kaiji's flaws, but the beautiful thing is, so could he. Kaiji is extremely aware of his personal failings, and refuses to lie to himself about his true motivations. When he slashes the tires of a Mercedes in the first episode, he mumbles about how the owner probably got his money in a crooked way, but also admits that this is an act of petty resentment, and that deep down, Kaiji just wishes he could afford one too. Even better, at the first stage of the bridge race, when the contestants see the spectators laughing below them, most wonder how anyone could be so cruel, calling them monsters. But Kaiji rejects this, saying that there is no difference between the entertainment and the audience. Everyone is the same. And he's right. While the racers are in dire straits, nobody is forcing them to be here, and the winners will happily accept the prize money. They are right about this being a disgusting situation, but they are legitimizing it at the same time. This commitment to owning his choices is the initial spark which eventually turns Kaiji into the hero of this story. First, thinking about himself as a willing participant in TA's games pushes Kaiji to be far more proactive than most of his fellow gamblers, who take the contests at face value and let fate run its course. More importantly, by refusing to be a victim, Kaiji loses the ability to pretend that he is better than the other gamblers. Before the rock, paper, scissors tournament, Tanagawa gives a bare-bones explanation of the rules and moves to leave. But the crowd heckles him for more details. So he responds by yelling that looking to other people for answers is what got them here in the first place. Kaiji looks on in silent agreement, but most take offense and whine about how they are being taken advantage of, holding on to the idea that they don't really belong here, as if someone mixed up the paperwork and threw one upstanding citizen in with 100 deadbeats. When you believe you are the only one who needs to be saved, it's easy to justify sacrificing others in the process. And most of these guys cave the moment a way out is dangled in front of them. But if Kaiji was to do something unforgivable, using fantasy to hide from guilt would not be an option. So there are lines he simply won't cross. During the first stage of the bridge race, the contestant in front of Kaiji slows down as the one behind him keeps going, giving him a choice between severely injuring an innocent man or having the same done to him. Kaiji is torn for a moment, then screams that he will not push anyone, losing his balance in the process and barely avoiding a fall. There was no strategy and no plan B. Kaiji simply refused. And it's this ability to throw away everything to protect what's important which becomes the source of Kaiji's strength. Most of Kaiji's peers are incapable of coming to terms with loss, making them easily controlled, both by their own weaknesses and other people. If you watch TA closely, they rarely use threats of force, instead operating through appeals to self-interest, finding desperate losers and offering deals which are slightly better than the current situation, or at least appear that way to a certain type of person. The players also pull this trick on each other, with most conflicts during the rock, paper, scissors tournament being resolved when one side convinces the other that surrender has become a rational move. Because Kaiji knows there are situations where he would choose defeat over compliance, he cannot be completely controlled, which gives him a freedom to pursue higher goals than most of his peers could even dream of. Critically, Kaiji can suffer short-term losses which let him establish credibility with other people, which we see in full force during the first arc. It's a tournament where the entrants use printed cards to play rock, paper, scissors. They receive 4 copies of each move, 3 star-shaped badges, and the ability to borrow cash at an extreme rate of interest. After 4 hours of competing with each other for badges, anyone with less than 3 stars or extra cards remaining is thrown in a holding cell, eventually being sent to a labor camp. After getting conned in the first few minutes, Kaiji is left crippled with 1 star and 1 card, but has quite a bit of cash, so he finds a washout with extra cards and another with 2 badges, convincing them to form a team. Shortly after, the teammate with 2 stars, Ando, runs off with a card and tries to win a 3rd, only to lose. He crawls back in shame, expecting to be punished, and the scene which follows is what I consider to be the defining moment for the whole series. Kaiji admits that he wants to abandon Ando, but chooses to let him stay, because his plan cannot work unless everyone believes in it. So it has to be beyond question that Kaiji will work in everyone else's best interest, regardless of what they actually deserve. This is why Kaiji is the fucking man. Whether or not he can trust his teammates isn't really important. Every person there is a lazy jackass, including him. The real issue is whether or not Kaiji can create a context which allows 3 such people to cooperate. And by accepting the damage Ando has caused, Kaiji maintains a future everyone can believe in, letting him push forward with more complex strategies than he could have ever implemented on his own. This mindset even extends beyond his friends and allies. Kaiji treats everyone he meets as if he is going to see them again later, letting most of his defeated opponents limp away with dignity, and only going all out when someone is so disruptive that they threaten the game itself. Because of this, Kaiji can really turn the screws on defeated opponents without making things personal. When he meets Takagi during the rock paper scissors tournament, we learn that they have been running identical strategies and they more or less acknowledge each other as rivals. After Kaiji pulls off a massive win, he bribes Kitami's teammates into finishing the session early, leaving Kitami isolated with 30 extra cards. Kaiji flatly tells Kitami that his options are to give up the cards and follow his teammates, or try to play 30 matches while Kaiji spreads rumors about what his cards are. Had Kaiji been a bastard about this or cheated, Kitami might have refused out of pure spite. But ultimately, both men were playing the same game. Kaiji just played it a little better, and Kitami knows that he would have acted no differently in Kaiji's position. Funai, on the other hand, was never actually playing the game at all, and when Kaiji reveals him as a cheater, he becomes so isolated that Kaiji can essentially force him to do whatever he wants so long as he agrees to keep Funai out of the holding tank. This all reaches a climax in the second season. Kaiji has actually been sent to the work camp at this point, and the entire first act is about setting up his conflict with Taro, the foreman of Kaiji's construction team. Taro puts on a friendly face, but does so to manipulate his workers into even deeper subservience, convincing them to spend wages on snacks instead of paying down debt, and running an underground casino where he uses loaded dice to financially cripple other players. Throughout the arc, we gradually see Kaiji move from taking Taro at face value to regarding him with open hostility, indulging in small acts of rebellion which the foreman responds to with escalating punishment, eventually trying to flat out murder Kaiji in a staged accident. As the conflict plays out, the other workers who are under Taro's thumb, the 45ers, look on in shock and confusion, unable to understand where this is coming from, or why Kaiji would pay such a high price when he isn't getting anything in return. But what they don't realize is, Kaiji is doing this for them. Every defeat Kaiji suffers at the hands of the foreman is a signal that he can withstand that level of abuse without giving in, which is only enhanced by how little reward he is getting for the risk. Because if Kaiji is this tough fighting over complete bullshit, imagine what he's like when things get serious. Later in the arc, when Kaiji comes up with a plan to turn Taro's cheating against him, the other 45ers jump at the chance to throw their savings behind it, letting Kaiji pull off a victory so big that the foreman is essentially bankrupted. They then beg him to take the winnings to the surface and gamble for enough money to buy everyone's freedom, which he does. It's Kaiji's first real victory and ends the show on an uplifting note, but takes even more significance on when compared with the earlier example from the rock paper scissors tournament. After forgiving Ando, Kaiji's group acquired the 9 stars needed to complete the game. However, they were left with an odd number of cards, meaning that someone would have to go into the holding cell and wait for the others to bail them out. Kaiji said the leader should take the risk, gave them his stars, and went into the tank. In a matter of seconds, Ando convinced the third teammate to sell the extra stars instead of sending them to Kaiji, who looked on in horror as a weirdo gave him a speech about how people are only loyal so long as they need you. Shortly after, Kaiji escaped through a combination of learning this lesson and being the main character, taking back his money and using it to free another sucker he met in the holding cell, Ishida, meaning that all the hardship and drama of the tournament amounted to a minor net loss in Kaiji's situation. It's weird that Kaiji made the mistake of counting on Ando, especially since a better option was right in front of him. When he realized there was an extra card, the right move would have been to casually give it to Ando, who is not very bright, then force him to take the fall right before the timer ran out. This lapse of judgment happened because earlier in the tournament, Kaiji was confronted by Funai, the high-level player who tricked him at the beginning. He pointed out that while Kaiji's team was allegedly sharing resources, Kaiji was holding all the cash, meaning that he could barter his way out of trouble if the plan fell apart. After this, Kaiji was so shaken by self-doubt that he tried to remove temptation by splitting the money evenly, wanting to share his burden with people who were obviously not fit to shoulder it. Contrast this with the second season, where the 45ers entrust literally everything they own to Kaiji, who is humbled by the responsibility but accepts with little hesitation. The difference is that while Kaiji has always understood how to win the confidence of others, by the anime's final arc, he also knows that he can trust himself. Funai's insinuations had devastated Kaiji because, back then, he had no real defense against them. Kaiji clearly has an instinct for right and wrong, but is also very aware of his own personal weaknesses, and had lived such a passive life that he'd never seen these two sides of himself fight it out in the real world, meaning that he couldn't predict which one would actually drive his behavior if he got the chance to abandon his team. But by the time he defeats Taro, Kaiji has been in several high-pressure situations where he got to put his character to the test and learn who he really was. Refusing to push another racer and saving Ishida came across as impulsive acts of rebellion which only prolonged the inevitable. And in the short term, that was true. But it also meant that when Kaiji finally found an opportunity to make real progress, he could confidently take the 45ers' lives into his care, wielding the group's collective power himself, rather than trying to share it with untested people. Kaiji is a fairly static character, and it's easy to see him as a tool Fukumoto uses to explore his zany scenarios. But humming away in the background is one of my favorite character arcs ever, with Kaiji starting as a complete loser whose only saving grace is his self-awareness, but eventually becoming the kind of guy who can wade into the hyper-competitive, win-lose environments that TA creates and break through to the other side. In the first arc, Funai points out that the rock-paper-scissors tournament could easily end without a single player getting detained. Everyone would just need to pair up and burn their decks with intentional draws, reaching 0 cards with no stars changing hands at all. He then laughs this off as irrelevant and says that human greed will always get in the way before setting off to hunt for new victims. As one-dimensional as Funai is, he really works as the first arc villain because, like Kaiji, he sees the larger picture and understands where the dog-eat-dog atmosphere is coming from. Most of the players are useless cowards who will conveniently disappear should they lose all 3 stars. And TA has strict policies against violence on the floor, making it almost impossible for players to punish each other for cheating or betrayal. This lack of accountability, along with the air of desperation, makes it almost impossible for players to take each other at their word or believe that they won't be abandoned the second they stop being useful. A fear which is very, very well justified. But where Funai uses his understanding to perpetuate the situation while making as much money as possible, Kaiji takes that knowledge and tries to make things better. By publicly suffering for his ideals, Kaiji proves how serious he is about keeping them, becoming a first mover who overcomes the total absence of trust by paying the price to generate his own. This allows the weaker gamblers around him to actually cooperate, because while they might know that they're selfish, cowardly people, they know that they can count on Kaiji, meaning that they can actually believe in the group so long as it is centered around him. It actually means the world to me that at the end of the show, we get a scene showing that after freeing the 45ers, Kaiji is hiding in shame because he's lost the rest of his share in a pachinko bar and can't afford to join the celebration. It's so pathetic that one of TA's henchmen actually takes pity and gives him a handful of cash, calling him a shitty excuse for a hero as he runs towards his friends. Kaiji may come up with some clever strategies, but he really isn't that much of a gambler. On his own, he's actually kind of an idiot. His true strength is his ability to understand the people around him and give them what they need to set aside their fears and work together towards a common goal. He is the master of trust, and I just think that is fucking awesome. Well, that's the video. This is the first one I want to actually try adding music to, and you can know if that worked out based on whether or not you can currently hear it and or watch the video at all. If you made it this far, I sure appreciate it. Thank you for watching.